Well, as you can see, Venerable Tupten Children is not here. She's actually away, as is Venerable Sangye Kadra, away for the week or so. And so I was invited to give the talk today, which I happily agreed to. So before we get into this very amazing chapter, I'd like to just spend a little bit of time bringing ourselves back into the space. I'll set a short motivation, and then we'll unpack this chapter. And just make sure that your mind is present in your body, that it's not wandering away into the past or traveling into the future. So in setting the motivation, what's very much alive in my mind this morning is that I don't think it takes us much time to look across our lives, look across the world to see that the earth and the world really need a lot of compassion right now. And that under the influence of all sorts of confused ways of thinking and afflictions, not only are many of our human family not wishing others to be free of suffering and the causes of it, but are intentionally causing harm, being the substantial cause for other people's harm and injury and sorrow. And it is because we are in samsara, we are under the control of our afflictions and polluted karma. We understand that at some level. But what we can really connect to, because one of the fundamental disconnects right now, at least from the way that I look at the world, is that, as His Holiness has said many, many times over the course of his life, that the human heart is fundamentally good, and that the Buddha nature that resides in each one of our minds is pure and untainted by nature. But due to this self-grasping, this self-concern, this self-preoccupation, we forget about that and strive only for our own happiness, alleviation of our own suffering, sometimes in extremely volatile, confused ways. So we disconnect from that fundamental compassionate heart. But what I do want to remember is that due to some amazing, great cause and conditions that we ourselves have created, that we have the Buddhist teachings in our life that give very detailed, practical steps on how to cultivate compassion, how to develop this incredible, courageous attitude of mind. And that even though sometimes the suffering is out of our hands, to be able to cultivate this mind of compassion can help us from falling into despair, hopelessness, rage, as we see this suffering in the lives of millions of beings on this planet right now. So today, as we share with this beautiful ending chapter of open-hearted life, let's really take the time to appreciate that we have access to wise teachings that help us to grow this beautiful mind. And it's not just so that we can find some peace and some ease in our own hearts and mind and have some tool to deal with our own suffering, which inevitably is going to come because that's part of the nature of samsara, but to be able to, by strengthening it internally, when we physically and verbally engage with the world, we will be able to bring that forward in these places and in these situations where suffering is right in front of us. And so let's really appreciate the rare opportunity that we have to have such precious teachings to be able to guide us in this cultivation of this beautiful mind state of compassion, not only for ourselves, but for others, not just for the short term, but also for the long term. So let's really connect to that part of our hearts as we share the Dharma today. So, some of you folks were here last month, but at the end of this book, which I just, in my little exploration yesterday, Venerable started this book 7 years ago. 2017 is when she opened up this book, which is quite fun. It says a lot about this book. There is a lot in this book, 69 chapters. And when she came to the last chapter last month, she said, well, there was another chapter. And the original publishers were in the UK, and for some reason I'm still puzzled about after reading it the past week that they removed it from the book. But luckily for us, Venerable didn't throw it in the recycle bin. She put it on her website and she continued to hold it. And so we thought for today to bring that unpublished chapter out, where she just unpacks these 12 ways in which we can incorporate compassion into these issues that are shared and mutual concerns of this human family. Not just on our small level family, neighborhood, city, state, nation, globally, and how to, in a very general sort of way, say, what would it be like? How could we address these topics if compassion were put into the mix? So that's what, and it covers a lot of territory, this last chapter. And so the book, through the course of her, unpacking this for us, along with Venerable Sangye Kadra and other members of the community over the past 7 years, we really got to learn what is compassion. And even more important, we got to learn what it wasn't. It is one of the most misunderstood states of mind that humans, any beings generate. So that's clarified in this book. How to develop it, how to nourish it, and some of the bumps and the obstacles that come along the way on how to develop and hold this as a fundamental attitude in our minds. So on the last chapter, Vena wanted to just bring it out there, and how do we apply it to certain topics and certain events that happen in our lives. So I'm going to do what she has done. I can't make any promises. This chapter is filled with a lot of things. But I want to do what she did for the past 7 years, which she just kind of unpacks it word by word, sentence by sentence, and then shares her perspective on what she's talking about. And I'll put some of my own personal thoughts into it that are similar to hers and sometimes different. And wherever along the way she has shared about compassion that I find firmly implanted in my own memory banks that I would maybe be able to share. So I'll do the best I can with this lot of juicy stuff in here. Okay, so to begin with, on this chapter 70, she says that compassion is an inner attitude. It exists in our hearts and minds. We are beings who also have bodies and verbally communicate with others. So how can we reflect our compassion in our physical and verbal actions, and how can we apply compassion to other areas of our lives? So right off the bat, she's talking about compassion is a mental state. It's an attitude, something that we cultivate internally. So on the cushion, reflecting, meditating, thinking about it. But then once again, and it can sustain us when suffering comes into our lives. We can use it as a tool to deal with suffering. But then she extends and says, well, okay, if we do that for ourselves, since we're engaging with each other all the time, with all sentient beings, how can we extend that with the actions that we do and that our words? How can we use compassion? Since she says caring for the poor and the ill instantly comes to mind, we think about compassion, and it's very familiar. That's sort of the go-to place when we want to be compassionate for those who are poor and ill. She says, we're not going to discuss this. We're going to discuss some other applications of compassion that we may not have considered before. While some of the areas mentioned below have become politicized, compassion doesn't dictate having certain political opinions or advocating particular policies. So, right off the bat, she's making it very, very clear that compassion is not biased. It is equanimous. It is meant and directed towards any living being. Wherever there is suffering, we want that suffering to end, the causes for it to end for that living being. And it doesn't matter what they look like. It doesn't matter what they believe. It doesn't matter what their ideologies are. Compassion in its true form is totally unbiased. So she kind of sets that as the foundation, because a lot of these topics that she's going to address are so politicized right now, so divided, so biased on how people address them, that she wanted to make that clear right off the bat. She said, okay, rather we suggest that all of us consider how to apply compassion in these areas of common concern. This is a brief list. Please consider other areas in which compassion could be applied. The key is to find ways to get our internal wheels of compassion turning. So the first thing that caught my attention, which is something that we're having a really hard time doing as the human family lately, is to find the areas of common and mutual concern. That when compassion plays itself into these different topics, these different things that are happening to the world, it can unite people regardless of any differences they have. Suffering is suffering, no matter whose it is, and we must try to alleviate it as best as we can. So suffering is a great equalizer, and the greatest tool to work with it is one of the greatest equanimous states of mind, which is compassion. And it's beyond politics, it's beyond religion, it's beyond gender, it's beyond race, it's beyond anything compassion. It is totally non-biased. And it is a shared reality that all of us suffer. Right? So we've got this shared reality, whether it's just being unsettled some in the course of the day or having tragedies like bombs dropping over your house, that is a shared reality of living beings. And that compassion is the great equalizing state of mind that could address any kind of suffering that there is. Now, to get our internal wheels of compassion turning is another issue. And I have to say that when my life is good, I'm going to check this with you folks, when my relationships are generally harmonious, being a monastic, I don't have a lot of possessions that'll fall apart that I want to buy something new. My health is generally good. My living in community here has been the most precious thing that I have. But when our life is good, sometimes we get caught up in a little bubble of life is good, and that others' lives don't catch our attention. In fact, we may not want to look at other people's suffering because our life is just fine. We don't want that to ruin it. We don't want it to dampen our good life. We like our good life, thank you very much. So there is sometimes a little bit of complacency falls in when life is going good for us. So that's something we need to really pay attention to. But sooner or later, suffering is going to come. It's going to come to us. It's going to come to our loved ones. And when we look at the course of our day, how many opportunities during the course of our day do we get a chance to get the internal wheels of compassion turning, provided that we open our minds, that we open our hearts, we don't run away or distract ourselves. The opportunities are multiple over the course of our days. So and to get out of our comfort zone. That's the other thing. Life is good. That's my comfort zone right now. There isn't any suffering. But when it does come, how to be able to get those wheels of compassion turning, not just for ourselves, but for those that are being impacted by whatever cause and conditions that are bringing on the suffering. So that was Venerable's introduction on how to look at these next few topics. So the first one she jumped into, and I don't think she doesn't indicate anywhere in the book that this is her level of priorities or what she thinks is more important than the next one. I don't see any particular way in which they're listed of value. So the first one is the environment. Wanting all living beings to be happy, we must care for the environments in which they live. One way to do this is by using only our fair share of the world's resources. This means reducing our consumption. When we care about others that we share this planet with now and those who will live on it in the future, we are willing to bear whatever inconveniences it may entail to reduce, reuse, and recycle. Now, I have found personally over the course of my life that this is an extremely deep practice to become aware of what I use, what the community use, how we take care of things, how we repair them, how we reuse them. This is a really deep practice. And part of the reason it's such a deep, profound practice is because we can get anything we want whenever we want. All we have to do is hit some keys, turn on a phone, and it comes to our door. And to be able to use a discernment, a wisdom that says, do I need this? Is this like something that I need to survive, to live, to sustain my life? So there is a level of taking time, having an awareness to care for the planet. So we actually think about this rather than think, I want what I want, I like. It's convenient. Convenience is one of the main words that came up when I was looking at this, that gives me reason to buy things that I don't need, to try to talk the community into getting things that we don't really need because it's convenient. I don't have to work so I don't have to put out a lot of effort. I don't even have to almost think about it. So convenience has become this little tagline that almost ensures that we're going to many times consume things that we simply don't need because it's convenient. And then instead to try to generate this internal process of good enough, dear, to be content. Now, climate change has moved into climate crisis. I mean, we are kind of looking at this thing just unfolding, due to so many contributing factors. There's a lot going on, folks. There's no easy solution to this. But one of the main ones that they're figuring out is this fossil fuels. And as a community of 23, I've got to tell you, it takes us some negotiating to get us all to be able to consolidate our trips to town, to keep the lights off, to keep the water use down, to not have so much packaging, to be able to be conscious about what can be shipped, what can be bought locally. It takes a lot of concerted effort and a willingness. So on the same thing with a family or a company or a business or a church or a social group, it takes a concerted group effort to collectively think like this and to be able to implement ways in which we can really care for the planet, very specifically in our own little sphere of influence. And there's an ethical component to it. First of all, the wisdom to assess the aspects of our lives that we can, do better, and to see the interdependence that we have with the rest of the world. I'm just so blown away when I see these huge miles and miles of plastic showing up on the shores of some South Pacific island, or they're taking down all of their trees and disrupting the habitats because of palm oil or some exotic lumber. I mean, the impact of our consumerism and what we want is impacting the lives of people on the other side of the planet. And sometimes I don't connect the dots because this is what I want. This is what I like. This is what I eat. This is how I wear things, without thinking about where this is coming from. And is it impacting the people in a good way, in a harmful way? So there's a lot to think about when it comes to the environment. And that compassion is being aware of our daily consumption and its impact on a lot of living beings. And so this segues into her second topic, which is vegetarianism. She says eating meat is eating the bodies of others. I don't think any of us would happily offer our bodies for somebody else's lunch. So why should we expect them to do so for us? It is possible to remain healthy on a vegetarian diet, or if you consume meat, then make sure that the animals are treated well while they are alive. So once again, what came up for me is the Buddhist teachings are our ethical compass, that our actions matter. Do we need to eat the flesh to be nourished? I mean, the numbers are astounding on how many millions of animals are slaughtered every day. Sheep, calves, lambs, trout, lobsters, shrimp, whatever, to nourish a body that does not necessarily need it. So this is a big ethical question here. And the way in which they're killed, there's no way around it. There's no humane way to kill animals. The other incentive, which ties into the environment, is that how much land do we put aside to actually grow the food? How much land do we put aside to actually graze the animals? This planet's got 71% of it is ocean. The other part is land. And of all that land mass, over 25% of it is just to graze the animals. That's not much room to fit the food for the rest of the world and to put ourselves in a place to live. So it could be used to raise food for the world. All of this land, that the open grazing we have around here, cows just take over the entire, state forest. They just wander around. And methane gas. This is very amazing. The front and the back end of animals, because of their digestive systems, let off 40% of the methane produced on this planet. Just their burping and their farting is 40%. Cows alone make up 14%, which is most of what we eat in this country. 40% globally, livestock contribute to methane gas. So these are not only ethical, but practical climate issues that segue into vegetarianism. Capital punishment. Next one. This is number 3. This is very near and dear to Venerable's heart, the incarcerated, working with the folks that are incarcerated. Research has shown that capital punishment does not reduce crime rates. In the heat of the moment, people rarely think, this action could result in someone's death and put me on death row. That's probably not their thought at the moment. People who are incarcerated are human beings like the rest of us and can make useful contributions to society where they receive a good education, learn the life skills necessary to support themselves, and manage their anger. In fact, older and wiser inmates are often the ones who can best teach the young reckless ones how to calm down, consider their effects on their actions. Having done prison work for at this point, this is over 25 years, Venerable has seen many people who have made grave mistakes change their lives. All of us appreciate the opportunity to make amends and to change our lives. So this one hits home very personally because not only does Venerable, but members of our community communicate with the incarcerated, share the Dharma with the incarcerated. And over again, they can testify by the letters, by the contact with the incarcerated, that so many of them, if they find a spiritual practice that resonates with them, they sincerely delve into this practice of trying to heal their minds from what they did and to try to become better, more compassionate, wise, ethical people. We can testify to this as a community, that this is a truth. And that they are not inherently evil, that what they've done is fixed in stone for the rest of their lives, and that they need to be punished, and there's no chance of them to change. This is one of the greatest misconceptions about the incarcerated. So this one, Venerable, very clear, but I think there's 27 states in America that have banished this fine, that have stopped capital punishment. So that's a very good sign. Number 4, family harmony and education. With compassion, we can work together to reduce poverty, increase parenting skills, and give children a good education. Doing so will lead to happier citizens, fewer unwanted pregnancies, less substance abuse, and less need for prison. So once again, it's kind of segueing into this, what they call the prison pipeline, that if children don't get the education, families don't get the support, that the tie between children that are not educated and prison are intimately connected. There are the causes, and this is many times the result. And nowadays, families come in all kind of combinations. I mean, through COVID, there was a lot of multi-generational families that came back together because of the economics. It's actually making a comeback. We know a number of families have got multi-generational families living. They're combining families, that are divorced or widowed. They've got complex family structures, single parent families, gay and lesbian families, interracial families, and so many of them need support. These are very complicated dynamics trying to make things work. Child credits, financial assistance so the children can have a good education, mentoring, tutoring, supporting school levies, being a friend to a child, being a friend to a teenager. It does take a village to raise a child. I think that's one of the great truths of the human family, that it does take that. The next one is suicide. Number 5. While in midst of emotional turmoil, ending your life may seem the best way to stop your suffering, but it's not a good option. Some people may feel that they will be happier after death, but who can see into the future and know that? Suicide ignores the fact that many people care about you and will suffer if you take your life. With compassion for yourself and others, it is best to stay alive and put efforts into discovering and actualizing your inner human beauty, and to focus on the good things that do exist in your life. So Venerable's kind of straightforward here. This is a very difficult, tragic kind of mind, to be able to wish to take one's own life in order to alleviate one's suffering. And part of the difficulty is that when our minds are in such levels of distress, such levels of pain, that the world becomes very small, becomes very narrow. All the options are gone. And so what Venerable's saying is that it's not a great option. The Buddhist worldview says, yes, rebirth is coming at the end of this life, and we don't know what's going to be there. But what we do know is that we have a human life right now. We have lots of potential. We have lots of possibility. She goes on to say then that everything is impermanent, including this pain, and that you can consult with a variety of people. There are therapists, there are suicide survivors, there are spiritual advisors, friends, family, that hearing their suggestions on how to alleviate and transform your pain. According to the Buddhist perspective, the fundamental nature of your mind is pure and untainted, and that pure nature can never be destroyed. Learn how to tap into that. Each human being is valuable. Each of us has the potential to be of great benefit to others, and we can learn how to do this. Connecting with others by reaching out to help them gives meaning to our lives and is fulfilling. So this is a really complex social issue right now. We have so many of our young ones that are taking their lives. But to somehow understand and to trust the impact that suicide does impact the people that are near and dear to us, that there are people, whole systems that are there to help us to try to be able to work ourselves through these really difficult times, that we have forgotten this fundamental nature, that our hearts are good, that we're kind, that there's this fundamental pure nature of our minds. It's gotten lost in some terribly wrong thinking. And where that thinking comes from, the cause of conditions, complex, ancient, who knows, societal, familial. There are so many possible causes for why people go there, but that there is help. And that compassion is the compassion for oneself. That's what's playing out in this ability to be able to step away from this incredibly horrible mind and to seek help. But once again, very complicated, very tragic, a lot of things going on there. Distribution of wealth. While it may not be practically possible for everyone to have equal wealth, no matter what economic system we follow, more equal distribution of wealth will lessen the causes for social unrest within each nation and war between nations. With a compassionate attitude that knows our happiness depends on the happiness of the people with whom we share our community, our city, our state, our country, and planet, we do what we can to support more equal distribution of wealth, educational possibilities, and job opportunities, and so on. This is a statement that the Venerable said a long time ago that helped me to make a connection. That she said that anytime there is unrest, it arises within a majority of citizens, people that see that wealth, opportunity, and a caring, fair system is not there. It leaves them out. They don't get the opportunities, they don't get the precious resources, and the benefits that are distributed. That unrest, demonstrations, violence is intertwined with this inequity as far as wealth distribution. The sincere effort to bring some equality of the precious resources that communities have, no matter how small or how big, as much as we can to alleviate the suffering, will alleviate a lot of the unrest in the world. And one of the things that I got, because compassion sees everybody's suffering as suffering. There's nobody who suffers differently more that gets more help. Suffering is suffering, no matter what level it is, that we need to alleviate it in whatever way we can. And that everybody wants happiness and deserves the circumstances and the opportunities to garner that happiness as they can. And one of the things that became more apparent to me is that this is not an extravagant demand. People who are protesting that we're all this social upheaval in the world, they're not asking for fame. They're not asking for mansions. They're not asking for special treatment. They're asking for to be listened to. They would like a place that they can call home. They would like food that they can afford. They would like some education for their children so they can succeed in life. They want some basic health care so they can live long lives and lower the stress enough that they feel good enough to contribute to society in a beneficial way. On some level, this is a no-brainer. They're not asking for the world. They're asking for basic dignity. And there's this, it's getting mucked up by the judgment, the crazy thinking of many of us who think that there are people who deserve this wealth, this opportunity, and some people that just haven't done enough, that just don't deserve it. They're not entitled. It's this crazy, mucked up self-grasping, seeing oneself as better than, that has totally distorted and polluted this share. Everybody should have a chance. Everybody should have some opportunity. Equity is a elusive thing in the minds of so many of us. We just don't think certain people deserve this. And so there we have the inequity. Then we have the unrest, the unhappiness, the anxiety, the anger, the frustration. People take to the streets and they're upset and they're not going to think clearly and things are going to happen. So to think that this is because due to the wealth inequity in our world, we have more than we need. We have more wealth than any world could possibly want. It's our ignorance. It's our self-grasping. It's our self-centered thought. Once again, very complicated to how to do that fairly, how to do that justly, but a system can be found. National international dialogue. Okay, this was 11 years ago. Federal made this statement. In recent years, national dialogue in the U.S. has deteriorated, with people ranging from politicians to talk show hosts encouraging anger, disrespect, harsh speech, and exaggerated accusations that only stir people up. It seems that rudeness, blame, and demonizing others is passed off as entertainment in the effort to gather votes. This is 12 years ago. This extends to international politics as well, with aggressive posturing and even terrorist acts being utilized in the pursuit of political goals. This lack of basic human manners, petty squabbling, and in some cases outright aggression interferes with finding solutions to very real national, international problems. Compassion helps us be more respectful and considerate so that we can work together for the benefit of everyone. So what you might have been a ripple 12 years ago is now a tsunami. as far as hate speech, misinformation, stirring the pot of people's emotions for political gain and power alone. This is like, it's the antithesis of compassion. It is totally opposite. Hateful falsities that get people afraid, get afraid of each other, we get suspicious of each other, we don't want to help each other. In fact, we see help as harm, which is which is happening right now in Asheville. People are so convinced that FEMA is going to screw them that they refuse the help that they deserve. We disconnect from our compassion to wanting to free people of their suffering. And what's so tragic is that this tends to happen with vulnerable populations that are right in the middle of a crisis, right in the middle of some misunderstandings, and will just fuel, and they're holding on to some kind of hope, somebody who's going to be able to help take care of them, get themselves out of this tragedy, this difficulty. And instead, we're just throwing this stuff on them that says, don't trust him, go hide. There's somebody out there that you should blame for everything. There's no help coming. Get over it. I mean, it's just the most hateful, hard-hearted kind of thinking that, and it sounds, and what's so difficult, and I see that this is not getting resolved, is that this demonization, I mean, this whole thing about freedom of speech. I mean, how much hate speech, how much misinformation that is part of free speech. And so along with other things, that there's another topic farther down that talks about the media that addresses this. It becomes our responsibility on how to take care of this. Okay, number 8, business ethics. Children and adults as well need good examples of people who act with integrity and consider the effects of their actions on others. In banking, politics, pharmaceuticals, and other occupations that strongly affect many people, it is important to conduct business with compassion, honesty, and generosity, rather than to pursue profits regardless of the effect on others. This plays out in countless ways, from the ways employees are treated to decisions about how to manage pollution. So this is a huge topic, and I want to say that one of our dear friends came here this week, Linnea. She was talking about how she worked for a very large company overseas, and that because the business ethic was being honest with customers, admitting their mistakes, she could see that customers tended to stay loyal to the company if the company was willing to be honest, to be fair with them, and to be respectful towards them. And so this is kind of not so much that the bottom line doesn't matter, because it does, because the profits, when done wisely, can trickle down to where everybody benefits, but to not be done with dishonesty in relationship to customers and suppliers and whoever. Once again, there's an ethical component that's involved with these business ethics. And that we've also had a number of our friends that have occupations that they see that the companies are starting to go into the slippery slope of not managing the money wisely, doing certain types of research that harm living beings, and that they're tied in enough that it would impact their livelihood, their resources, being able to take care of their families. When they start seeing sort of the mission statement and the vision of the company start to turn, it got bought out by somebody else who just wants the profits to matter. And so they're really tied and really conflicted on how to be able to have right livelihood and how to be able to work in a purposeful and meaningful occupation without feeling like they're really giving up their ethics and their values. And this is something that we've heard over time that has been a challenge for folks. Number 10, the media. Okay, this is the one that goes with the one I just talked about, which was international and national dialogue. The media, from news to cinema to video games, has a tremendous influence in shaping our ideas, our behavior, our consumption, our personal relations, and work ethics. The media's goal of increasing sales and profits can play on people's insecurities, fear, and greed. Responsible media considers the effects on people of the way it reports events and the entertainment it creates. So this is sort of the rock and the hard place as far as um, supporting regulation with our, communications with our social media. But the freedom of speech always gets thrown in there as this is something everybody deserves. So the way that I saw this one, folks, is that the ball is in our court. We've got to be able to be the ones who regulate how much of the media we listen to, because it influences us so much by what we see, what we hear. The impact is tremendous. It may be conditioning us to be people that we really want to be, or it could be unintentionally or unconsciously, we're not cognizant of it, of having us become people that we don't want to be. I mean, there's only so much negative stuff that you can listen to before you start having your mind start to do this kind of weird, I wonder if that's true. I kind of feel like that sometimes. I mean, there's so much influence in the way that we think. Too much media, I think, really deadens our wisdom mind to be able to discern. Are our perspectives getting wider from what we're hearing and listening to, or is it getting more narrow? Is it getting more distorted? These are things that we must take responsibility for. The regulations, the free speech stuff, that's getting the can's getting kicked down the road like life, decade after decade after decade. I don't know where it's going to get resolved, so it gets put back on our plates. Once again, our ethical values and what we understand to be beneficial for our minds, we need to be really clear about that. What are we going to listen to? We can't stick our heads in the sand, which means shut off all the social media altogether. I'm not going to listen to the news. I'm not going to listen to anything. But we want to be wise and moderate in checking in with, how do I keep connected to the world? How do I use this to empower my Dharma practice, to be able to generate my compassion, my love, my bodhicitta? And at the same time, what are the sources that I'm turning to? Are they mostly reliable? Are they telling me the truth? How can I make sure? Because it can be really addictive. Our minds these little common, ordinary minds we have, like to be entertained. We like juicy things. We like things that are kind of off. We're fascinated with, His Holiness says, we're fascinated with things that are just weird, that are antithetical to this good heart. We're just drawn into it like children watching a fish tank. So we must be wise and moderate our use. So this is really where we need to go. It's on our plate. The ball is in our court. Until things change out there, we really need to work with our own minds. Number 11 is medicine. With compassion, doctors encourage their patients to make living wills so they can have their desired type of medical care should they later become incapacitated or unable to express their wishes. This is probably one of the most compassionate acts we can do for our families, to set things in order, and not just the order like all of our stuff. Who gets what? Who gets the house? Who gets the furniture? Who gets the tchotchke? Who gets the whatever? We want to make our passing as much of an act of kindness for our loved ones as much as an act of wisdom. We can alleviate a huge amount of anxiety, fussing, confusion, conflict if we have a living will that we go over with our family before we, get too far out there, so that they are clear as to what we want for our end-of-life care, and after that, to avoid any confusion so they can air their concerns, their fears, if they have any, to clarify that. This is one of the greatest acts of compassion we can do for our families. And then she continues, and Venerable says it is well documented that patients who know their doctors care for them as human beings, they heal better than others who are brushed aside. So this is mostly, she's saying, kind of for the medical field. So for those in medicine, this problem maybe is for you, but also for us who are patients. Recently, there has been a direct effort to bring compassion into healthcare settings, both in terms of making sure that all who need it receive it, and in the care that is administered is kind. We need to thoughtfully consider ways to support and provide incentives for healthcare professionals to carry out their work in compassionate ways. It would be good to remind people entering healthcare and public health professions that providing medical services should be seen as a compassionate profession, not a lucrative business. Since everyone equally wants happiness and to be free from suffering, let's use our human intelligence to find ways so that all citizens have equal access to good quality health care. So that is pretty well, that is clear as far as Venerable's thinking about that. And as patients, to be able to establish relationships with our care providers, be very clear on what we need, be very empowered to be able to earn their trust, and that this is not a perk, that this is an entitlement for all people to have basic good health care, and to advocate that in a skillful, intelligent, compassionate way. Anytime there's issues around who gets health care, how much is it going to cost for them, is to really be very involved in that, because we have wonderful health care in our county. We're really quite blessed here. Last but not least is stopping harm. Compassion can be a strong motivator to stop harm and injustice. While anger may give us an adrenaline rush and a lot of energy, it also clouds our minds so that we cannot make wise decisions. Compassion, on the other hand, wants to stop harm in order to protect both the victim and the perpetrator. Perpetrators harm themselves by harming others. They often experience self-loathing afterwards, face imprisonment, and are shunned by their families and society in general. With compassion for everyone involved in a conflict, we try to activate our capacity to think creatively of ways to deal with situations that will bring better results for everyone in the long term. So this one I think is pretty well also. Venerable has done a nice, it's not just talking about the perpetrators of violence, but also we take to the streets and we're trying to stop injustice, or we're just trying to stop harm. When we get so caught up in our passions and our emotions and our anger, we don't see very clearly. So she's giving a sort of a strong directive and words of advice that we need to bring compassion into any form of activism, and that as well as those who are perpetrating harm against society must be not only held accountable, but also to bring compassion into those situations as well. Once again, long term. So other areas, here's the last of this chapter. Many more areas in society can benefit from cultivating a compassionate perspective. Civil rights, international relationships, all the treatments of animals, to name a few. Whatever area we work in, whatever hobbies we enjoy, all these can be positively influenced by incorporating compassion. When we play sports with compassion, we train well, we do our best in competitions, but we avoid gloating when we win or feeling despondent when we don't. Company management that treats employees with care and consideration create a better work environment and are rewarded with employees who will go the extra mile for the company. A compassionate perspective, this is kind of her very important conclusion to really think about this. A compassionate perspective recognizes that some issues are very complicated and cannot be solved by taking into account only one part of the equation. Social problems such as poverty and pollution are complex, and compassion for all parties involved will stimulate us to educate ourselves regarding the nuances of these issues, and then act to facilitate solutions that address the concerns of everyone involved. So this is the call to develop compassion and to bring it into our everyday life, to see that there's nothing that we do in the course of our life that's unimportant, that's trivial. When we bring compassion into it, the relationships change. The activities have a different kind of feeling to it, a different kind of flavor to them. And it's not some sort of grandiose attitude that is beyond our reach and outside of our scope of development. Bringing compassion to our social circles, bringing compassion to our workplace, bringing compassion to our classrooms, bringing compassion into our communities, our families. It's not outside of our scope, but it is a boots on the ground kind of state of mind that'll serve and benefit everything we do with everybody we meet. So this is kind of day to day, build it up. And this book has given us probably the most precious tools to be able to do this. And so that is how she really does end this chapter, to say that the book lays out, at least for me, this is like the third time that I have heard this or received teaching and read this, is that it gives very practical yet profound steps, one foot in front of the other, how to develop compassion, how to grow it, how to sustain it, and how to put it out there in an active sort of way with our body and speech as we go through our lives. And the rippling effect matters. I can't say this more definitively and with a lot of confidence that what we do matters. And so let's really keep Venerable's wise words here over very complicated and complex issues, that we can participate in our own sphere of influence to to integrate compassion into wherever we step into these places, wherever it impacts us personally, to make sure that compassion is one of the driving forces behind whatever we do. And we have the tools to develop it and the tools to be able to manifest it in our lives. So that is the quickest unpacking of a chapter that could have taken the entire year. We could use that. So for the last few minutes, if anybody has any comments or questions or wants to share their concerns or their ideas.
So many of these ideas are politicized, but it's also because the people in political power have a little bit more that they could potentially do about some of these things through regulations and policies. And I know I've been surprised talking to one person in particular who, when I bring up these issues that I care about, animals or climate or war, whatever it is, the reply I often get is, well, we're not going to solve all the problems in the world. And this is also someone who's kind of given up on voting, giving up on politicians. And so in my mind, I know that I can't single-handedly solve the climate crisis or, how animals are treated, but I can at least I can be aware of these issues. I can try to be educated about them. I can donate money or do whatever little acts I can do. And then I can vote for the leaders who I think might actually do the things I want them to do. So for me, this compassion is also then kind of staying civically involved in voting, recognizing that we don't have to just check out of it and say, well, why vote for the lesser of two evils, but to have that compassionate framework in mind.
Yeah. And to continue to remember that compassion is an internal attitude. It's not something we put up on the shelf because the external conditions don't seem to be conducive for us to be able to manifest it in our lives. It's something that needs to be sustained, nourished, so that when the opportunity does arise, as Venerable Rinpoche's saying, we're clear about what our values are, we're clear about our level of participation, and we go for it. That is, small things matter. And the education process on where to put our compassionate action is very important. We all have our favorite projects, endeavors, issues, I'm sure. That's what hearts that are filled with kindness tend to want to look outward and say, how can I help? Minds of compassion, how can I help? How can I alleviate the suffering? But the mind itself has got to be sustained. It's got to be fed. That internal wheel of compassion has got to be greased. And if there's nothing in front of you, still grease it, because it's going to come sooner or later. And we want to be really clear and purposeful in how we do that. Yeah.
Just a fair view from the viewpoint of palm oil. Because from Southeast Asian, a lot of the people, they're actually very poor. So what they do is actually they get funding from agencies to support the plantations, so that this is the only way that they can survive. And there's actually a very interesting notion from those farmers that plant palm oil, and they view that lots of the Western countries, they don't have compassion over them because their ancestors has already cleared their land. They have soya bean, everything, but what they have is they have nothing, and they need to survive. So that is actually the other view, that how can we be compassionate to them, because this is the sole source of the earning to support their life. Yeah.
And unfortunately, the system, the rainforest, the sustainability of that was never economically considered on how to sustain the farmer's life. So the long-term view is more complicated, took more time. But the species that have been endangered and have come extinct. So the farmers, even to ask the farmers to say, okay, we've got this glorious rainforest. How best is this? Can we employ you? Can we put you to? How would you steward this for the country? It was never seen as an option because it takes time, it takes money, it takes effort. Where palm oil, it does sustain their lives, but the long term cost of it is the thing that sometimes I'm sad about. And of course, it's so in our foods now that we can't almost live without it. So we are in. They're stuck in a hard place in Iraq, and so are we. But there's something that I sometimes think has been lost for them, as the people that live in that country and had those rainforests and had those species of animals that have been lost because of the lack of long-term view, lack of really caring for them in a way that would be sustainable.
I think the hard part in looking at a chapter like this is that, she went big time global, and, you can't legislate compassion. You can't regulate compassion. So your point, and you brought it up a couple of times, but to come back to compassion is a state of mind, as she brought it in too. And so the way that we enact that is we live our lives as best we can from that place and make the decisions that we make from that place. And share the opportunities for people to study this book or find different ways to develop it, but somehow to keep it as a personal, what do I want to say? It's like the danger of trying to want to then paint, if everything was compassionate, then the world would be okay. Which
Well,
is
it's
not what I heard, but I'm saying that is a danger to go to. That, I mean, and it's a little bit in Tenzin's thing there. It's like, so there's a specific problem here, and how do we go about changing that? We have to come at from internally every single time, right? So our policymakers develop their own compassion. Yeah, it's like that. So I think it's just important to hold that.
Yeah.
And we get disappointed. Otherwise, it's very
and angry about it too. I mean, Venerable's, her response on a lot of these is just, what we can do is let's reflect, let's be considerate. And the sphere of influence is only so big, but the sphere of influence, when you take a collective like this, the sphere of influence starts to expand a little bit beyond. And a lot of these things personally impact us. So it can be, in our own world for sure. Yeah. Yeah. There's big thinking in here and there's everyday thinking in here. And the way that she concluded this is whether it's our sports teams or our card clubs or whatever, we can bring it into a very, very personal place. Yeah. Lauren.
Personally, I find that when I'm experiencing suffering, that the fear comes up that volume of suffering is going to increase or it's going to get worse. And the belief that I shouldn't experience suffering makes me angry. And just remembering that is a pattern. And then when I see that pattern coming up, turning to the Dharma, reading, finding somebody to talk to about this can bring me back onto the path of compassion.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we have Venerable has said it, and not she just said it recently. She said, we're always, when suffering comes, they go, why me? Which I say that a lot in my ears. But when good fortune comes, we never ask why me. So to be able to balance, to know, okay, for me, when I get into when something happens, suffering, part of the way in which I try to come to terms with it is that I have the tools, like you're saying, I have the friends, I have the support to bring me back to how can I be with this suffering? How can I strengthen my mind? How can I hold steady? Because once again, it's impermanent, it's going to change. And how do I hold it while it's moving through my life in a way that it impacts me greatly? Yeah. And the bigger our hearts, the more tender we are towards those outside of our sphere, that we feel that too, But it's a mind, gosh, just can't say it enough. It's a mind we need to cultivate and nourish and take care of over and over again. Yeah. Thank you, Lauren. Yeah. So you have your support for that? You find your ways to come back to the Dharma, you find your ways to find support. Yeah. Yeah. Suffering can be overwhelming. All right, folks, that's the time that we have. Let's take a moment to just rejoice that we have this beautiful book to guide us, that we have a wise and kind teacher who can put it into a personal perspective and can put it into a much bigger bodhicitta perspective, a large perspective, and that we can live our lives between those. And so let's rejoice that we have the tools, that we have each other, that we have our practice to be able to cultivate this beautiful state of mind for the benefit of not just ourselves, but for all living beings.